And welcome back, and we are talking about the bystander effect. Now, in section one, we covered basically establishing the bystander effect as a problem and finding a definition for it. Um, as I post these on the blog and everything, as I mentioned, it would be in three parts. Also, under that, NBC News and some of the other organizations have actually done experiments with it themselves, and a lot of some of those we'll actually be talking about as we go on. But I've actually posted the videos, to those original NBC stories that ran, and some of the other things that you can watch it, at your own leisure. But now that we've understood that there is a problem, let's kind of talk about the problem and understand it a little bit. I first want to bring up the study from 1968. This would have been 4 years after Kitty Genovese, and about 4 years before what happened to Dr. Friedman, Wolfgang Friedman. Um, but let's see if we'll do this right here. Pull this up. There we go. Okay, good. The first lab experiments on this phenomenon were done in 1968 by John Darley and Bib Latane, where a participant was placed alone in a room with an intercom. They were told that they could talk to the other participants in the other rooms from the intercom. They were actually listening to an audio recording and told the microphone would be turned off until it was their turn to speak. During the recording, a participant suddenly pretends to have a seizure. The study found that how long the person waits before alerting the experimenter directly related to the perceived number of participants, and in some cases nobody said anything, they just ignored it. So that's one of the things you want to talk about it, and kind of give some examples of it. And I think that'll make a big difference. The first one is social psychology. Well, actually, before that, let me just mention another one called the diffusion of responsibility. And this is the normal one that that tends to come up. Basically, where people, a bunch of people witness an act, and each one of them individually think, man, somebody should have done something, but they never think that they should have been the ones that did it. And because of some different social, psychological issues, they don't, feel responsible for it. We'll talk about those. Now, you're going to have, people that are just crap, just don't want to help, and, just bad people. But in most cases, that's not necessarily it. Now, to get back to what we were talking about with social psychology, I don't like the term, but anyway, the term for the main thing in it, other than the diffusion of responsibility, is called pluralistic ignorance. What pluralistic ignorance is a situation where a majority of a group members privately reject a norm, but they assume incorrectly that others accept it. Therefore, in turn, they go along with it. Kind of, a no one believes, but everyone thinks that everyone believes. It's a bias about a social group held by a social group, and it basically it goes right in with that diffusion of responsibility, where this person doesn't do anything, but they don't see anybody else doing anything either. So they don't, they're thinking, well, maybe they know something that I don't, or whatever, and and they don't act because of it. You see this throughout history and in a lot of different things. Here in the United States during Prohibition, most people weren't for Prohibition, but they mistakenly believed through propaganda and what else that that everyone supported it, so they went along with it, and then you had a lot of bootleggers in business for a good long while. Even in the town where I live in Athens, Alabama, you had a situation for years, that the city was dry, meaning there were no alcohol sales anywhere in the city. And every year, or every 4 years or whatnot, it would come up on the ballot, for people to have a wet dry vote, and they would always, vote to keep it dry, even though, most people wanted it wet. The church members and or religious leaders, in the community raised hell about it so hard that they actually believed that everyone believed it. You see it in the 60s here in the United States, where most whites thought that other whites believed in segregation, and so everybody went along with it, even though most people were actually against it. And so pluralistic ignorance is a big deal. And but it is beatable, and we'll talk about that, in section 3. But it can be dispelled. And you see things like in colleges where fraternity guys, or even just regular students, they go on binge drinking because they think that's the cool thing to do, and everything, because they think that's what everybody's doing, and they don't want to be left out. It's just pluralistic ignorance. Once again, the same thing, in the bystander effect, pluralistic ignorance. Once again, with the study, that we talked about in 1968, people that, when it's someone by themselves, they're more likely to intervene, when it's one person as opposed to a group. Doesn't mean they always will, but, they're just more likely to, but basically you have a situation where everybody is waiting on somebody else to do something. And in the end, no one does anything. But because of diffusion of responsibility and that pluralistic ignorance, they're able to, move on and and blame other people for it. Another thing that we have going on in there, which is sort of like pluralistic ignorance and going into the whole herd mentality type of a thing, it's called social proof. And it's also goes by some other names like informational social influence, but that's kind of a mouthful. And that's basically where people are going to assume that there's someone more qualified than them that is going to do something. Which sometimes there are, sometimes there aren't, but it's really nothing more than conformity. And it really bothers me. Frankly, I hate conformity. I like structure, but I hate conformity, because conformity is the enemy of innovation. And it just that's pretty much just what it is. It's social conformity. Well, everybody else is doing it, so that's what I did. Somebody should have done something, but it's always about blaming somebody else. It's a huge cop out to me. It's when you get right down to it, it's just people making excuses for bullshit behavior. And I can't stand it. It reminds me of that guy, that works his ass off to get out of work, and he actually would have worked less if he actually done the work. But those are your three things that tend to make up the bystander effect. The diffusion of responsibility, the belief that why didn't someone else do something, or no one else did anything, so why should it be my fault, kind of a thing. Pluralistic ignorance, the belief that that this group is in a consensus that no one's going to do anything, and you're just kind of going along with that. Or social proof, the belief that there might be somebody, the whole social conformity that well, there was someone who's more qualified than me, should have done something. Once again, it all goes down to someone should have done something, but no one did anything, because they're all standing there and got all these weird psychoses going on. But that's basically your makeup of the bystander effect. Kind of wrap your mind around that a little bit, and then we'll pick up with part 3, talking about an actual solution for it and a way to counter it that you can actually work a longer and short term type of a thing. We'll see you then.